everyone, it's Jan from Jannplansthings and welcome to my Plan With Me video for this week. I am continuing on with my Cardcaptor Sakura theme. I have also tried to put all the materials that I'm using in the top left, so just watch out for that one if you're curious of whatever I'm using at the time. I'm also going to try and put down what colours I'm mixing as well for those who are interested, because I've had a few questions about that. And how to get the certain colours. So this week, to start off, when I was sketching this, I did everything under like a bowl again, like a circle, just to get the overall shape of everything I wanted. But because I had just like a default rice bowl lying around, it is a little bit big. I feel like after doing it, the graphic is a little bit big to compared to how much I wanted space for writing, which is fine. Cute characters, it's okay. But I think if I was doing it again, I would make it a bit smaller. But well, whenever I do stuff on my journal, I feel like once I get past a certain point, it's too late. I'm just going to commit, and that's it. I'm having the two Guardians of Cardcaptor Sakura in this spread. So I've got Kuro-chan on the left, he's the sun, and then the moon, I think, is Spinal. I can't remember how to pronounce his name. It was always weird because I was watching the dub all the time. And on the right, and then I'm only recently watching the Japanese one with subtitles again, but I'm not up to season 2 yet. That's okay. I'm getting there. It is fun to rewatch everything though. So this time around, I've got a few little star bubbles that I had at in my front cover, and I'm using those as my date bubbles for this week. I've always really liked doing the dial layout, especially when I know I don't have as many flow-on tasks. I like to use the dial layout. When I've got like a week where I know I'm going to have a lot of small repetitive tasks, I'd much rather use a table layout, because then I can see them flow across the days. Whereas if I know I'm going to have a lot of standalone tasks that are specific to each day, I do like to do this layout a little bit more, and also is a little bit more flexibility in terms of having tasks in between the days as well when you're doing a layout like this. However, I feel like a lot of people who are using it with trackers, it might be a little bit more difficult, unless of course you're using like the stars or the petals or something as trackers around the stars. So that is up to you. But I do find that I like using this one, and I come back to it quite a bit. But I do have a little bit of foresight in what I'm going to be doing every week, so it might not work for everyone. However, here it is again. Oh, look at this. If I'm looking at this, the way I've drawn everything, I'm going to have a lot of work on Monday and a lot of work on Wednesday, probably on Friday as well. But that is basically how I've done it so far. I'm using a QUINACRIDONE Gold from Daniel Smith as my main yellow, and a lot of the times I'm just mixing it with a little bit of brown to darken it. But what I do prefer to do is just to dilute the yellow up and down depending on how much I want to use it. So right now, in order to add the shadows, I'm just using the QUINACRIDONE Gold right out of the pan, and it's a lot deeper and a lot more rich, and it looks like shadows instead. Normally in the past you would have seen me shade with grey everywhere first, but I'm finding if I'm doing a nice bright color like yellow, I don't want to use the neutral grey as the shadow just as yet, because I feel like it doesn't build as much depth. But you know, that depends on what you're doing. Especially I think when you're doing an anime style painting, you want the colors to be a little bit brighter. Therefore, I'm not laying down the grey as much as I usually do. In order to get the black blue grey that I'm trying to get here, I would be mixing the neutral tint with some blue. And the problem with this is, because of the coating of the LT paper, it's a lot more streaky than painting it on a watercolor paper. So what you're wanting to do is find a paint with a lot of smooth milling, and you don't want your cat to stop you painting, because you want to lay the paint down as fast as you can. You can see how Humphrey is trying to, like, I don't know, he's like stamping his paw and things and then trying to stop me from moving my brush as fast as I can. So you can see the butt of Spinel being a lot more streaky than Kuro channels on the left, because I couldn't paint as fast, and especially with the darker pigment on the coated paper, it shows up a lot more. So I gave up. I tried to take him off. So the thing is, you want to try and paint as much as possible. You also notice that when I'm painting my designs, I try to avoid having large areas of a single wash for that exact reason, because I don't like the streakiness. And I guess the other thing you have to take into account is when you're using watercolor, if you're using regular watercolor paper and you're doing a big wash, it's not such a big problem, because you can just lay down a lot of water and then the pigment disperses. If you're using a good pigment, that is, disperses very well across it, especially if it's not granulating. But when you're using on a coated paper, you can't actually put as much water on the page, because that creates buckling in the page. So you notice like my pages always look really, really flat. A lot of you ask me all the time about how come my pages don't buckle, and I have done a tutorial on it in my YouTube channel about painting in my bullet journal, but I'm just going to reiterate again that if you are painting on a thin paper like the LT or on the Hobein or something like that, you can't be laying down a lot of water like you would in a watercolor notebook. Because if you lay down a lot, the paper will automatically buckle as it dries, and then you get those little divots in the paper, and half of the problem is that then you get crinkly paper. But the bigger problem then is also that the pigment starts to dry within those wells, in those little rivets that you create, and that creates a lot of splotches and stripes in the paper as it dries. So if you do see your paper doing that, I'd recommend drying off your brush. You can kind of see my tissue off to the left. I always have a tissue or a napkin that I'm wiping excess water off, so I'm never putting too much water on the page. So if you do see your paper starting to buckle, I would recommend drying off your brush and lifting the extra pigment off the wells as fast as you can to try and get it to dry as evenly as possible. So that's like, you just have to be aware that you have to adjust your technique depending on the mediums that you're using, so it's not just the same all the way through. And of course, I do find that using like non-granulating paints, like the Hobeins and the Missions, a little bit easier to use on the LT, because of course they don't granulate and the pigments don't bunch together, causing a little bit of granulation. But I know Daniel Smith has a lot of beautiful granulating paints. I tend to just pick the ones that aren't granulating when I'm painting in this notebook, compared to when I'm painting in a watercolor pad where I kind of just go for it. I was just checking his pores then to see whether or not he got any pigment in there. I am still using my Pepperconarts metallic gold, and I just love it so much because it re-wets so fast compared to the Clearo paints that I was using in the past, and it goes on like molten metal and it kind of looks like liquid gold. Fantastic. I love this stuff so much. I think I say that every week because I'm always in shock whenever I use it how nice it is. But yeah, so I think a lot of you have asked me about painting within the journal, and you do have to adjust your technique as you go. It's not the same all the time, and you have to brush on very dry. I also recommend that you use a proper watercolor brush and not the aqua brush, the brushes with the water inside the pen body, because although they're really great for traveling, you can't control the amount of water that's flowing through the feed on those brushes, and then you're more likely to get it to pull. It's a bit more forgiving in the Archer and Olive, but if you're loving painting within like the LT or other coated papers like in the Hobein or even the Midori, I don't recommend using those types of brushes if you're wanting to do like urban sketching or updated drawings while you're up and about. Especially if you're at home, try not to use those. It will be a lot easier. However, if you're like a master of that watercolor of the aqua brush, then just go for it. But I found it far easier once I switched to a proper brush. So if you are struggling, that might be why. If you don't have any other brush, just empty the brush of water and then just dip it like a normal brush, and that could work just as well. So I'm finding the combination of gold, blue and pink absolutely fantastic, and I'm really glad that Sakura, you know, lends itself to that. I do really want to draw Sharon, because he's like my favorite character of all time, but his like uniform is all green, and my cover this month is pink, and that kind of upsets me a little bit because I feel like it would clash a lot, like a bad strawberry. So I'm going to think about how I'm going to incorporate him into my journal, maybe in the last week. And yeah, so the other thing is, you're noticing now that I'm going over the Sakura Micron with the Sakura Micron again, because the Pepperconarts metallic paint is so opaque that it tends to make the lines underneath it disappear. So unless you're like fantastic at colouring in the lines, I probably would just recommend you going over it again to get it to really pop. But I'm loving this. I'm kind of loving this month as well. It's just so fun, and the designs are really fun to look at every week while I'm using them. I hope you found that video helpful, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you guys again next time. Bye!